Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 14th of June, 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're joined by David Scott with Northern Exposure, and of course, David reporting from north of the border.
We'll start with Iran, and Reuters here reporting. Obviously, the bombings or the minings, or was it? What was it of the oil tankers? But this video purports the U.S. claims to show Iran's Revolutionary Guard removing an unexploded mine from the side of one of the oil tankers. So this is black and white footage, allegedly recorded by U.S. aircraft. But what does it show, Brian?
Well, this is the question. If this was genuine footage of Iranians, they could be using bomb disposal experts to remove a device. This is quite possible. But what do we hear at the moment is that the Iranians are vehemently saying we are not involved in anything to do with these devices. I don't know what we can trust on this one. I do not know what we can trust. Do I trust the Americans? Not particularly.
If you were intending to carry out this type of so-called terrorist attack on oil tankers passing along here, are you then going to go and start removing the munitions that you've put on them in the first place?
Well, it seems surprising, doesn't it? I think we're now into very interesting times, but clearly we can't trust news footage that the West, be it the US or UK, is putting out. And I think we should be starting to listen when overseas nations are actually saying that something is falling foul or running foul.
What do you think, David? Is this anything more than a Western false flag to try to justify some kind of attack on Iran?
Time will tell. I mean, we don't know very much that's factual about this. There's, of course, a long history of Western false flags. Remember the Maine, the Gulf of Tonkin, and many more. So there's previous here. And the Iranians have at least as much credibility to anything they have to say about this. And obviously, removing an unexploded device is not evidence that you conducted the attack. So it all seems to be based on very little. The critical thing is, what will Donald Trump do? Because he commented last week that if it had been up to Bolton, that America would be in 4 wars by now. So that would suggest that the Donald is acting as some form of restraint on the war hawks within the American cabinet, his own cabinet. Let's hope that continues.
Well, that's a very interesting point. So let's just remind everybody of this. Of course, this is Exercise Noble Jump, which is taking place in Poland at the moment. About another week or so of this, a NATO exercise, one of several that have taken place there. But yesterday, we'll be glad to know that Donald Trump was meeting President Duda, who's the president of Poland, and his wife, and they were very excited to get together to meet. So they met at the White House, and then they held a joint press conference. And some of the comments in the press conference were quite interesting. So let's just have a listen. Let's have a listen to this.
President Trump, you plan to enhance U.S. military presence in Poland. Last year, you promised you would enhance military cooperation, training, intelligence, missile defense, and it's happening right now. People of Poland still remember your incredible speech in Warsaw. Why Poland is such an important ally for you?
I just have a very warm feeling for Poland. I always have. And it's now even beyond that because of the relationship which we've developed with your president and First Lady. And it's just, they're incredible people, hardworking, smart, very industrious people. And what they've done with the country over the last 5 years has been something that the world has watched and the world has marveled at. I've just liked Poland. So when the president came and he asked me whether or not we'd consider this, I said I will consider it. And now, because of his leadership, we're able to do that. And that's fine with me. That's great. Great people. and say hello.
So this leaves me a little bit confused because apparently the only reason that Trump has pushed military personnel and weapons into Poland is because he likes Poland. Is that a likely explanation? No. I would.
Mike, we're watching complete madness put across as real news. He likes Poland, so he decided to fill it full of troops.
So there's that, which leads you sort of your thoughts in one direction, but then there was this.
Quickly, President Duda, thank you. Do you see Russia as an ally or an adversary?
Are you talking to me?
To President Duda.
Boy, was that a set-up question?
Ja bym bardzo chciał.
Today we are in the following situation. Russia attacked Georgia. Then in 2014 it attacked Ukraine, and these are facts. These are facts which belong to the recent history. We would like Russia to be our friend, but unfortunately Russia again is showing its very unkind, unpleasant imperial face, and we do not want to be part of Russia's sphere of influence. And I am happy that today we can speak boldly, also in connection with the military presence of the US and NATO in Poland, that we truly are, first and foremost in terms of politics, part of the West, because we have always been part of the West in terms of culture. We've always been part of the West because it is from the West from which we adopted Christianity in 966, more than 1,000 years ago. And since that time, we have been part of the West of Europe. We have been part of the great Christian culture of Western Europe. But we have to stick to this West also in terms of politics, and this is what we want, and I firmly believe that this is the biggest desire of Polish people, to be part of the West also in terms of politics. Thank you that the United States is supporting us in this respect.
Excuse me.
And just to finish, I hope that Poland is going to have a great relationship with Russia. I think it's possible, I really do. I think because of what you've done and the strength, and maybe we help also because of what we're doing and doing for Poland. But I hope that Poland's going to have a great relationship with Russia. I hope we're going to have a great relationship with Russia. And by the way, China and many other countries.
So, David, this seems like mixed messages here. I'm not really quite sure what to make of it.
Well, yes. You have the president of Poland basically saying, he's alluding to the fact that politics is downstream from culture and culture is downstream from faith, and that the divide through Europe is between the Roman Catholic West and the Orthodox East, and that Poland's with the West, and that's the schism. So he's referring to extremely ancient events. And then in the same press conference, the man in the next lectern is talking about extremely contemporary events and doing deals and working out, a relationship where you have trade and normality. So this is viewing things on the one hand as a clash of civilizations that is ancient, and on the other hand, that's let's just do some business.
Now, if I can just add a bit, watching Trump's response to that question, he deflected it, took my mind back to Tony Blair campaigning, and he did a breakfast talk in Plymouth, which I was able to attend. Towards the end of Tony Blair's talk, he was asked a very simple question, and instead of giving an answer, which was obviously his answer, he gave a very devious answer, and people focused on that. Why was this man so frightened of that particular question? And here's Donald Trump. He was asked a question. He's president of the United States. He's moved the military into Poland. But when he's asked the question, well, he doesn't want to touch it. He passes it over to the Polish president. And I think this is a certain indication, of course, that what he's standing there saying is going on is not what is really going on. I think that bit of exchange, that body language, very, very important.
So we've got NATO exercises going on in Poland. We've got the US pushing troops and material into Poland. And if you remember from last week's one of last week's news programs, Jens Stoltenberg pointing out that they were pre-positioning weapons in Poland, but it doesn't end there because NATO is also in Estonia at the moment with another exercise. This is Baltops 2019. NATO forces landing in Estonia, a combined force of Romanian, Spanish and US Marines as part of BALTOP's 2019, a US-led exercise intended to strengthen maritime interoperability across the alliance. So it involves 16 allies in total, 2 partner nations. Well, this is an annual exercise, fair enough, but nonetheless, when you put all this stuff together, it's, we've made this point before, but it's just increasing pressure on Russia.
Yeah, that's absolutely what it's doing. But everything that we've been seeing over the last couple of years is an expansion of the European Union and NATO to the Russian border, and the Russians are clearly going to respond. So deliberate policy. Well, if we leave Russia with perhaps memories of the gulags, let's return to Britain in 2019, and we've got Lynn Thayer. The British government at the moment is undertaking what is a particularly brutal harassment of this lady, as she's threatened with what we can only describe as stop-start extradition proceedings. And these, of course, are putting her under tremendous pressure, as she knows that if she's taken back to France, she can expect 2.5 years, roughly 2.5 years, in a French jail before any form of trial. We've got ambulances turning up without being called, strange cars parking. There's clearly something very sinister going on. Let's just have a look at one of the pictures. This was a picture taken of an ambulance which turned up outside a lady's home. The lady had been giving Lynn accommodation, and nobody called the ambulance. It simply turned up outside the house. There was then a repeated and pretty aggressive banging on her front door, which they didn't answer, and eventually that ambulance drove off, to be replaced by a car which sat very close to the house for a while before disappearing. So this appears to be some pretty major harassment by the British state or agents of the British state. Let's remind ourselves what Lynn's crime is. She used her professional biochemist expertise to assist those trying to help cancer sufferers using the proven benefits of GC-MAF. Now, we understand that extradition has now been delayed again. We're waiting for further news on that. But of course, what this comes down to is that the British state does not want information about the benefits of GC-MAF coming into the wider political arena, and it would be very convenient if Lynn was to be extradited and to disappear inside a French jail. I believe I'm right in saying that at the moment, despite the democracy of the European Union, French jails have some of the worst conditions in Europe. So pretty sinister stuff, I think. If you want to give your support for Lynn, then please contact your MP. Start to talk about the subject of cancer treatments and why the government is not progressing with the benefits of GC-MAF, and stay on these people's coattails.
David, today is the 2nd anniversary of Grenfell Tower.
It is, and I just wanted to highlight one development. This happened a couple of weeks ago. The government have announced that they are going to fund £200 million to remove and replace the aluminium composite material cladding from other privately owned high-rise developments. Now, there are 166 of these out of 176 identified. So only 10 developers have actually paid to have this material removed themselves. And the government are saying, well, we will now fund the rest. And there's a lot of propaganda surrounding this, with the government talking about reckless developers. But I would point out that they're paying £200 million to remove and replace the cladding. That is an admission of liability. We've been saying since 2017, we've been saying that building regulations were defective, and the building regulations failed the people of Grenfell Tower, and that is why that the same errors were found in all of these different locations, 176 the private sector alone all across the country. It's not because someone in Grenfell was doing something unusual, it's because the building regulations were leading people down a path which was unsafe. In adopting the 200 million payment, I think the government are at least tacitly admitting this.
And you wanted just to highlight this article that you wrote in June 2017, Grenfell, Why the Fire Regulations Failed.
Yes, this goes into the detail as to why exactly the regulations failed and how they failed and what is required in order to correct the measure, to correct the problem. This predated the report that the government commissioned, which came down to more or less the same conclusion, that a much more thoughtful, a much more project-specific and analytic approach and less rules-driven tick box type approach needs to be instigated in order to prevent something like this happening again.
Okay, well, good news now, because the government has decided to put £40 million more into another 5G test bed. So this is fantastic. 40 million is to be invested in 5G test bed and trial projects across UK industry as part of the government's plans to improve mobile connectivity. Now, what they're saying is that this is the latest in a round of investment which totals 200 million so far. Previous investment in the 5G test beds and trials program has driven work in the healthcare, tourism, transport and broadcasting sectors. The latest investments will support similar work in logistics and manufacturing sectors. They expect a public competition to launch later in the year for bids to be made for the next test bed and trials on 5G. Well, they say that they have undertaken a thorough evidence-based and hard-headed review of the 5G supply chain to ensure a secure and resilient rollout of 5G. But what's interesting here, Brian, is that not a single penny of this money seems to be going into any kind of assessment of the health implications of 5G. So here's Jeremy Wright. He had to say 5G is about more than mobile phone consumers having a fast and reliable connection anywhere in the country. And I've made this point before. This is the first generation of mobile phone technology that the government has actually been putting effort into helping the telecoms companies roll out. Yeah. And the question is why? And I think that quote there gives us a clue. 5G is about more than mobile phone consumers having a fast and reliable connection. They're talking about hundreds of thousands of devices per square kilometre being able to be connected to the 5G network. They're talking about using the 5G network for security services and military use as well as consumer use. So this is clearly seen as a strategic part of what the defence apparatus that we have in the country now.
Well, clearly it's got huge implications for the accuracy of state surveillance on people, Mike. There's no doubt about that. But I find it interesting, if you don't want to get involved in risks, then you don't bother to put any money into examining possible risks, which is exactly the same tactic of the pharmaceutical industry. You don't examine the risks of the medication you're giving, therefore there is no problem. So I think we're seeing an easy parallel here.
And even better news, because we are going to be sharing DNA with the EU. This is good stuff. Well, this comes from November 2016 originally, because that was when the government decided to follow the recommendation from Parliament that Britain should opt back into the so-called PRUM convention. This covers the automatic sharing of DNA samples, fingerprints and vehicle registration between the law enforcement on both sides of the channel. So agencies in the UK and across the EU will be able to search for matching samples on each other's databases, DNA databases, boosting their capacity to tackle cross-border crime, apparently, and protect citizens. So the UK's implementation of PRUM will facilitate better cooperation between police forces and UK law enforcement agencies. Unknown DNA samples taken from crime scenes can now be compared automatically with profiles held by other EU member states. This is good stuff. Nick Hurd, who's the policing minister, said connecting to the PRUM DNA database framework will help our police forces to quickly identify foreign criminals and bring them to justice. I don't think that this really has anything to do with identifying foreign criminals.
No, it's to do with identifying people, and again, takes me back to my visit to the US through Los Angeles airport a couple of years ago, 3 years ago maybe, where I questioned the need for my fingerprints to be taken and my iris to be scanned, to be told, well, your government has already given us permission. So it makes sense this is now happening with the EU. David?
Well, this is a criminal. Criminal is an interesting word because it's not defined in a way which is reliable. It will be redefined as we go along. There are many things which may be criminal tomorrow, which we might think are entirely normal today. We'll come to a few of them later in the programme.
Indeed. What's next? Philip Hammond, dividing line between Conservatives and Labour is our reputation for economic responsibility. There's only one dividing line, David.
Well, I thought this was a fascinating little insight. This is Philip Hammond giving the game away. Yes, the only difference between the Conservative and the rabidly Marxist Labour Party is the Conservatives' reputation on economic responsibility. No, it's reputation, not necessarily actually ability, but yeah, reputation. And then this letter here goes into it in more detail. The Conservative Party has a hard-won reputation for fiscal and economic competence that has been the bedrock of our electoral success over generations. As we enter the campaign to select a new leader, it's vital that we do not throw this away. He then goes on and says how terrible it was when they took over. So there was a 9.9% of GDP deficit, which was indeed horrendous, and it's now a more manageable 1.1%. And he then goes on to talk about how the national debt is now falling sustainably for the first time in a generation. And I was wondering how we could have a deficit and be adding to the debt while the debt is simultaneously falling. But don't worry, it's all that denominator, GDP. As a percentage of GDP, things are getting better, even though we're still borrowing. This little graph next just shows how horrendous the 2008 crisis was. And you see the truly horrific spending that the Brown government undertook, and the steady recovery from that desperate situation. But we're still quite heavily on the wrong side of that line. So there's still borrowing going on, and it's shall we say, it's not exactly what I would say robust as a position. But the main thing I want to highlight here is the lack of any other clear blue water between the Conservative and the Labour Party. The idea of the left-right split, the tribal thinking that's encouraged, doesn't mean anything. The Labour Party pushes things towards a more extreme authoritarian left. The Conservatives come in like a ratchet and stabilise things, and nothing's taken back, and some things get worse, and then the process continues again. There are no differences on military union, on independence as a nation, on the role of government. There is no difference between them.
Indeed. Now, over the last couple of weeks, we've had quite a bit in the media about milkshakes being thrown over people, and other people suggesting that perhaps acid would be a better thing to be throwing over people. And it seems that Joe Brand, who many view as some kind of comedian, has been making jokes about acid as well.
Yes, so she's picked up, there's been several people on social media making these comments and getting some criticism. So she obviously thought this was a good idea and said, well, yes, I would say that because there's certain unpleasant characters that are being thrown to the fore, and they're very, very easy to hate. And I'm kind of thinking, why bother with a milkshake when you can get some battery acid? So that was the joke, she said, and there has been a bit of a reaction to it. And the reaction has involved the police now. We see here the Metropolitan Police. Police have received an allegation of incitement to violence. That was Metropolitan Police on 13th of June. The allegation relates to comments made on a radio programme. The allegation is currently being assessed. There have been no arrests and inquiries are ongoing. So here we go. The brave Miss Brand is now being investigated. Now, a couple of points here. Firstly, when you start limiting free speech and you start criminalizing humour, and the left point at this and they say, well, you know, we're going to use this. We're going to shut down opposing viewpoints. We're going to criminalize them. And you start seeing people like Count Dankula being tried in Scotland for a joke. And the assumption is that the people in political control will always be in political control, and the powers to silence people and arrest them over a joke will not be used against them. This isn't the case. There are no limits. Eventually they will come for you. So you have to defend free speech at all times. And the second point is this idea of hatred. There's something very unpleasant about the constant drumbeat of hate from the left, and it means that people like Tommy Robinson, Farage, Sargon of Akkad, who stood for UKIP, are now unable to be safe in public, and they're unable to discuss their ideas without being called a Nazi all the time. This is not healthy, right? This way of shutting down ideas and shutting down free speech is profoundly dysfunctional. And we see another example here. Now, this one's from Scotland. Now, a high-profile feminist writer was attacked by a gender activist at an event hosted by Edinburgh University. Julie Bindel was targeted after warning of the dangers of allowing men to self-identify as women. A recent report by Women and Girls Scotland accused the Scottish Government of putting females at risk in order to push a radical gender ideology. Right, now, I would agree with her on that. So she was called a Nazi. The event held last week was organised to challenge proposals to allow men free access to women's spaces in prisons and hospitals and on sports teams. After speaking, Blindell was waiting for a taxi when a man in a woman's clothing shouted in her face, calling her a Nazi and TERF scum. That stands for Trans Exclusionary Radical Feminist, if you didn't know. The man lunged at her and had to be restrained by 3 security guards. Writing in Times, Blundell explained that she's experienced similar abuse many times in her career because of her belief it's impossible to change sex. So she's got something which only, a year or two ago, everybody agreed with. And that viewpoint is now being attacked physically in the street, and people are trying to silence her from putting the viewpoint that women are women and men are men. And we have to stand up for free speech, because it's the only way we can actually express ourselves. She goes on here, I refuse to accept the Orwellian concept that it's possible for a man to simply declare he's now a woman because he feels like a woman. And she added, we've arrived at the shocking state of affairs when feminist campaigners are called Nazi scum and have no platform, denied a platform for speaking out on behalf of marginalised and abused women. And most concerning of all, she says 12 members of Edinburgh University's staff LGBT committee resigned because of a decision to invite her. And a Green MSP who attended the meeting felt it necessary to apologise for doing so. So you see this is institutional. This is parliamentarians are running from this. Everyone's frightened of free speech. Everyone's starting to apologise and to back off saying things which I would maintain are clearly factual.
And this, university's policy sparks backlash after saying transgender people must be positively represented. Again, the Orwellian word is coming out here. This one's from England. This is University of Sussex, I think it is. They put out a rule that it was that all people who are transgender must be positively represented. You could not say anything against anyone who's transgender or any aspect of transgenderism. And academics have started finally to react against this and say it's stifling debate and it's Orwellian. They've talked about the chilling effect this is having on free speech on campus. Well, amen to that, because this has been going on for years. And encouraged by many academics, it's good to see some resistance finally coming forward. Now, back in 2017, we did an article called Defending the Indefensible. And this looked at the importance of free speech and why it's necessary
to draw the lines limiting free speech as tight. Can't incite murder or attacks, but everything else is speech.
We've
lost
free speech. David, we can't hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, we'll have to move on. And are you back?
No, unfortunately, we've lost Scotland.
Okay, well, look, let's have just a couple of reminders. On Wednesday, this coming Wednesday, 19th of June, in the George in Plimpton, David Ellis and I will be running a little tutorial, perhaps is the right word, on the use of Twitter for activism and so on. So get along to that if you possibly can. There's no cost in that. All we ask is that people bring a phone, a mobile phone or a tablet in order to take part in what we're doing. If you like what the UK Column's doing and you'd like to support us, then please get along to ukcolumn.org/community, where you can take out a membership, and your help would be very much appreciated. And just a quick reminder that AV10 DVDs are available on the UK Column shop.
Okay, on Tuesday the 18th of June in the Royal Seven Stars Hotel, the Plains Top Nest, there's a talk on what does being green and sustainable really mean now in this attended world of new renewables and smart technology. Was the green movement hijacked? This should be a really interesting event with some deep questions being asked about what's happening at the moment, and some very interesting speakers there. Professor Julian Clocludia, Justin Walker, Piers Corbyn, Sandy Adams and Alan Davies. So there's quite a wide spectrum of people from different backgrounds there, all starting to ask questions about the green movement, which is of course being pushed very hard by the government and internationally, particularly under Agenda 21-2030 policy.
David, I suppose, welcome back to the programme, but I suppose related to your thing is this: in The Independent today, growing threat from far right as white extremists form largest proportion of terror arrests seen in 15 years. And they say that overall number of arrests for terror offences drops by 40%, but white suspects at highest number since 2004. So what kind of numbers are we talking about? Home Office data shows that 41% of suspects arrested in the last year were white, the highest percentage since March 2004. Black suspects accounted for 11.9% of those arrested, up slightly from 9.9% the previous year, while the number of Asian suspects dropped to 36.2% of those arrested in 2018-19, down from 40.6% in the 12 months prior, and the lowest percentage since 2006. Home Office data also shows an increase in the number and percentage of arrests for suspects with extreme right-wing ideologies. A total of 33 people with such views were arrested in the year to March 2019, up from 29 the previous year and 9 the year before. So, Mike, the question in my mind, David, is because I think what is going on here is that there is a very great effort to encourage so-called far-right extremism, and part of that, of course, is to sell the idea that people are involved in it. And of course, if what you do is you divert the police and you say, well, you're no longer looking at this particular group over here, you're going to start looking at this group over here instead, then of course the statistics would appear to show that it's a growing problem. I suspect it's not a growing problem at all, and it's pretty much the size it always was, if it exists in the first place.
I think that's absolutely spot on. When you look at Islamic extremism, I have an understanding how that works, right? You understand where the money comes from, right? A lot of it's Saudi money that's coming in through the mosques. I understand where the information comes from, distributed through the mosques and online. And I understand the range of opinion in the Islamic world that goes from moderate to extreme. So you've got a community and you've got a range of opinion, and you've got a subgroup within that that's sitting on the extreme and violent end of things. I get that. I get it in the world of, say, communism and socialism. If you go to the extreme ends of that, the radical anarchists, right? They openly preach a violent ideology, and you can see them. I've seen them in selling books in the middle of Glasgow. and I've spoken to these people. They're not hidden, right? I can't find the far right. I mean, I'm not saying they're not there, and there aren't people with these views. I can't find them. Where are they? Where's the community? Where's the discussion? Where's the money? Where's any of it coming from? It just seems to be more of a worry than a reality.
David, perhaps we could remind our audience of the image we showed of the Army's policy to identify extreme right-wing people, and that include anybody who was patriotic or anybody who challenged the government in a generalised way, or the left wing. Yeah. So when we look for the definitions of who is right-wing, it's the government that is coming out with the definition to suit the government's own policies. And of course, we've had information from people who've left the Metropolitan Police that in their opinion, the prevent policy, which is supposedly protecting us from terrorism, is actually helping create an extreme background, particularly amongst youngsters in schools. So I think your comments are very interesting. Why can't we find this problem? Because it doesn't really exist, but the government would have us believe it does.
And your comments there about the redefinition, because the feminist speaker who was going to Edinburgh University, who was called Nazi scum, I suspect she's quite heavily left of centre, I suspect. But she is, in the mind of at least some people, now defined as Nazi scum, right? And the idea that Nazi, fascist, these words, which actually are not synonymous with the right-wing opinion, really, when you delve into it, but they are in the public mind. These now are being viewed as synonyms for people with whom you disagree, people you hate, right? And people who have views which are not part of the ever leftward and ever more extreme march of a particular ideology. Everyone outside the extreme authoritarian left is going to be defined as far right, it seems.
Yeah. Well, let's follow this through, because a couple of days ago we reported on this, the protests at the Birmingham schools, where Muslim parents were protesting at what they saw was the inappropriate sexualization of their young children in primary schools. But what we pointed out was that the BBC in particular failed to mention that local Christian parents, were now fully supportive of what the Muslims were doing, and the protests included Christian people. So BBC didn't want to get involved, and we got interested in this lady, Katie Hopkins, who pushed out a video where she was clearly stirring by asking a local Birmingham paper, the Birmingham Mail, why they weren't reporting on what was happening. And we said it's interesting that this lady herself is not really reporting independently. She was coming out extremely hard against the Muslim community. She wasn't mentioning the Christian parents involved, and she was referring back to the LGBT community, although the protest is not about the LGBT community, it is about the sexual education of children. But she said in a video that it's not something she's doing independently. There's a very large American audience for this, and it's the reason why I'm actually trying to involve local people. So we were curious and we asked this question at the time, and I'd like to say a very, very big thank you to a few sharp-eyed viewers and sharp-eared listeners who've provided some information. So let's come to this, because we now learn that Katie Hopkins is working for Rebel Media, the very same station that of course has been promoting Tommy Robinson and has been coming out with some pretty hardline reports about the breakdown of UK and trouble between communities. So let's have a look. One of the things that she said in their video, I think these individuals from some of these cultures are feral. Well, we'd just like to remind people that if we look at somebody like Peter Sutherland, who's now deceased, but he was the UN Special Representative on Migration. He was quoted as saying the EU should be doing its best to encourage mass migration to, quote, undermine the homogeneity of European countries. And so we're curious as to why Katie Hopkins, with her illustrious mainstream media reporting background, is not asking the questions about who has created the immigration problems. She's trying to get in amongst local communities, and I think Mike clearly stirring the pot to see whether that will help inflame the tensions, or that's how it appears to me. But let's have a look. More information comes in. Thank you very much for the people who provided this. International Business Times, a really good article which I encourage people to read. Katie Hopkins and Nigel Farage tell America that Britain is scared and divided. We are not. So this is more of the scaremongering. And here she is. And this is part of that article. They make much of their patriotism, at least to domestic audiences, but last week both of these ostentatious and ostensible patriots propagated a suggestion that Britons were cowed, afraid and divided in the aftermath of the terrorist attack in Westminster. Hopkins used those very words. So this is very interesting stuff that these two are working for Fox News. But it gets deeper because we had more information, and here is Katie Hopkins talking as part of the Conservative Political Action Conference in America, which is itself hosted by the American Conservative Union. Well, who are they? Well, you can find this information very easily. Here's the American Conservative Union. We believe that the Constitution of the United States is the best political charter yet created by men for governing themselves. It's our belief that the Constitution is designed to guarantee the free exercise of the inherent rights of the individual through strictly limiting the power of government. Is that what we see America doing worldwide, Mike, is exporting this sort of freedom? Well, if we then get into the people, it gets interesting. Here's the chairman of the American Conservative Union. Sorry, losing my voice a little bit here. He's a political man through and through, but he's got all the right caveats. He's involved with the church and something to do with children's homes or something. But this is full deep state American politics. And if you have a look at who they say you should be giving your money to, it's back to Donald Trump. And if we get into the executive director, this bit is interesting because they want to export this brand of American conservatism right around the world. So they've got CPAC 365, an initiative to replicate CPAC in dozens of states around the country and now around the world. So if you think you're free in your own country, these people are coming for you. And if we have a look at Dan Schneider himself, he was personally selecting conservatives to serve on various bipartisan boards. So everything independent there, Mike. They were all selected by this man to carry out the business. And if we come full circle, just before we came live, the BBC reported that Labour has, basically put the whip to their MP, Roger Godsiff, because he was filmed agreeing with the supporters outside the Birmingham school. And he's been told he is not to talk about this subject anymore because it breaches the Labour Party's LGBT policy. So, David, there you are. The political parties now banning free speech, even though the protest is about the sex education. It's nothing to do with LGBT.
Yes, and not only will people be silenced, that they'll soon be called Nazis. There'll be no platforms. Violence will be used against them. And if they resist, they will be locked up, I suspect, because the law is also an instrument of this. We've seen this with the ridiculous haters campaign in Scotland, which targets only people with a certain political ideology and allows and indeed encourages hatred to be poured onto parts of the community where it suits the government's interests. We have to stop this. We have to recognize that people are human beings and we have to treat them accordingly with the civility and dignity that they demand as children of God.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the news. I had promised to give an update on Georgia Pulican today. I have been unable to do that. I will do that on Wednesday this coming for the forthcoming week, and bring you up to speed on what Georgia has been able to do, and a little bit more on what's happening with the yellow vests. We will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.